Welcome to the place where we gain knowledge through the lens of creativity. I am Aaron Dworkin, and this is Artful Science. Thanks again for joining me here on Artful Science. Today's show is masks, spewing science out of our mouths. And my guest is George Rutherford, who is and serves as a few titles, Professor of Epidemiology, Preventive Medicine, Pediatrics, and History, Head of the Division of Infectious Disease and Global Epidemiology in the Department of Epidemiology and Biostatics in the School of Medicine, as well as being the Director of Global Strategic Information Group in the Institute for Global Health Sciences, all at the University of California, San Francisco. George, welcome to the show.
Thanks, a real pleasure.
So I figure I'll just dive right in, right?
Go ahead.
Wearing a mask has probably become, little did we know, over a year ago, the most divisive issue in America. And that's something that almost seems to define people. In other words, if one is wearing a mask, it means all of these other things about you as well. Or if you are wearing a mask, these types of things. And so I first wanted to just get to the science of it.
Sure.
Say I'm, 6 feet away from somebody else, and I'm not, directly kind of, spewing at them. Does a mask really matter in those types of circumstances?
Oh yeah, absolutely. So you have to realize a couple of things. Masks leak, right? So this is all harm reduction. This is not this solid primary prevention. This is just about reducing the chances. So the first thing to realize is that if the person wearing a mask, if they're coughing or sneezing, it's going to get through the mask, at least at some level. And if you're wearing a mask, you're going to be protected from inhaling it, but your eyes and the conjunctivae around your eyes are part of the respiratory, not your eyes, but the conjunctivae are part of the respiratory system. They're part of the respiratory epithelium. That lining has the same receptors that the SARS-CoV-2 virus attaches to as the rest of your respiratory tree. So that's a couple of things. One, so it protects you to a certain extent, but you're even more protected if you're wearing glasses. And secondly, and more importantly, it protects people around you if you're one of the 60% of people who are transmitting and have no symptoms.
Gotcha. And so just to be clear too, so the mask, of course, will just dramatically reduce anything related to my mouth or nose,
Yeah.
But that we can actually, if someone breathes out whatever particles, we can just get it through our eyes.
Right. This is why we say don't touch your eyes. So somebody imagine being on the C train going downtown in New York, right? And some guy's hacking and coughing on the pole, and you go and touch the pole, and then you rub your eyes. You're inoculating that into your respiratory system, right? So we're a little concerned about eyes, and you'll see in the hospitals people wear eyewear for that very reason.
Gotcha. So, obviously there's kind of a lot of debate about this, and people who will say the hospitals are filled with people who were wearing masks. I think there's even some people who think that wearing a mask can cause you to get it. So I just want to kind of clarify, because a lot of times if I have a conversation with someone, they're like, well, this is kind of what I believe. What does the science tell us? Do we actually have some data about if people wear masks, here's what happens in terms of transmission of the disease?
We have three streams of data. The first stream of data is from particle physics. It actually will look and measure emissions that go through masks. Face masks if you're just talking, face masks cut down 95%, 96%. Of the particles of the respiratory droplets to which the virus adheres, leaving your mouth and nose.
Wow.
If you're on the receiving end, it cuts it by another 50 or 60%. Again, the outlier is your eyes, right? The other thing we think, and I haven't touched on this yet.
And sorry, just before you get to that, just so that I'm clear. So basically for the I've heard, right, that wearing masks, it helps others around you more than yourself. So kind of the science actually tells us that pretty much it is in that way, and that it's helping to prevent 95% of bad stuff going out of you, and
Right.
maybe 50 to 60% of bad stuff coming into you. Is ballpark, is that kind of a good way to
Maybe
think?
maybe a little higher, maybe more on the 60% of stuff, bad stuff coming into you. It prevents most of the things coming into your mouth and nose. It's the eyes that are the outlier, as I said.
Gotcha, gotcha. Okay, great, thanks. And then you were going to mention
Yeah,
something.
the third thing is that we now think pretty clearly that part of your symptoms are related to the a number of viral particles you inhale. So it's related to the size of the inoculum. Because the masks cut down the inoculum you inhale if you're going to get sick, right? We think that people who wear masks get many fewer symptoms and don't have as severe disease. And we're trying to prove that right now around the country. So one whole school of thought is from kind of particle physics and aerosol science and all that stuff. The second is really from epidemiology and looking at people at risks of transmission of people who wear masks and people who don't wear masks. Not wearing masks is a huge risk factor for acquiring infection. And there's some wild stories, outlier stories that I think illustrate this. One was a man coming back, this is in March, coming back to Toronto from China. So long haul flight, right? Really long haul. Sick as a dog, wore a mask. Nobody around him was infected. Same row, front row, behind, in front of, flight attendants, nobody. Another comes from Springfield, Missouri, where two women went back to work as, I'm going to sound like my mother here because I have 1950s language, but went back as hairdressers to a beauty salon, and both were infectious. Both actually had symptoms, and they took care of something like 128 customers, and nobody got it. Nobody got infected because all the customers wore masks and the two women wore masks. So those are really remarkable stories, I think. But we have a lot of epidemiology that backs it up.
Gotcha. Absolutely awesome. And one thing too, just to come back to this idea of the volume of the virus that you get, the amount, literally. So I think a lot of people may just not be, and some of my audience may not be aware. So if that, kind of, we think, oh, if we got some of the virus, that's it, it's going to go and replicate in our bodies and we're going to get it. But literally the amount that we get when we get it matters.
There's a new paper out that estimates this, that you have to inhale 1,000 particles, viral particles, 1,000 separate viruses to have enough to get infected to establish the infection. So if you inhale 100,000, you're going to get infected quicker. The infection is going to proceed more rapidly. You're going to have greater amount of tissue infected, and you're going to have worse outcomes.
Wow, gotcha. Okay.
The third line, which is one of the things we're working on, is what happens. This is a policy intervention. What happens after states or counties implement mask mandates? What happens to the hospitalization rates? And they go like this, right?
Wow.
So it's not even people necessarily wearing masks. It's being told they have to wear masks,
Right.
and so those are the three lines of evidence.
So thank you for sharing those. So it makes it very, very clear, and definitely more helpful to also just understand, both from kind of this physical level, but well as also just tracking what actually happens with people. So a quick question. I actually, I had one of the masks that I was wearing that had the vents on it. And I was going to go in to try and go with my wife to an appointment at the hospital. They said, that mask couldn't be worn in the hospital. Could you just talk about, so the type of mask matters? And yeah. I thought, that's kind of cool. I love Star Trek. This is like a high fanfangled mask. And there's like, no, better with cloth.
So those masks are called valved masks, when they have this sort of valve on the front of them, or they have two on the side. They're for construction, right? So you're not breathing dust, you're not breathing cement dust, you're not breathing in nails, whatever it is. And so they protect you, but you fully exhaust all your breaths. It doesn't cut anything down. So it protects coming in, but it doesn't protect going out, which is why they kicked you out of the hospital. Those are for construction. Now you can wear one of those and a regular surgical mask over it or under it, and it'll be fine. But it's,
Not a replacement.
That's the problem. That's the
Yep.
problem.
Gotcha. And so now looking forward, what's your sense or what do we know from the science about how long will we have to wear masks? Obviously, we're, now in the midst of, and when the show gets aired, we're in the midst of vaccinations. Is there a sense of what kind of that ballpark date is where it'll be, okay, you really general public indoors, you won't really need to wear a mask?
It depends on how many people, what proportion of people get vaccinated. We need probably at least 70% of people to be immune through vaccination in order to get to that point called herd immunity, where the virus has a hard time finding the next susceptible host. So we know from such such scientific hotbeds as San Quentin State Prison and Avenal State Prison that they're way up into the 70% range with when their outbreaks happen in the inmate population. Now, how applicable are prisons to everyday life? It's probably kind of how applicable cruise ships are or fishing vessels are to everyday life. But we know from these these fairly closed environments that you need 70-80% of people that it'll go through that many people before it stops being transmitted.
Gotcha. And
So I think smart money says 70%.
And one last question that before a quick arts question, but is there, there are some people I've encountered who say, okay, yes, I get the science that masks matter, but I have my individual freedom. And just wondering, what are your thoughts about, right, that balance that some people feel of, yes, okay, but I feel I have my individual freedom. I should be able to decide where I wear a mask or not. And this kind of overall public health. What would be your encouragement of how people should think about that?
We make all sorts of compromises to live in society. I don't hear people saying that stop signs are optional and that it's a matter of their individual freedom to whether to stop at a stop sign or not, although in Southern California, people roll through them all the time. But it's, it's part of living in society. If you want to go off by yourself and live in the wilderness and not wear a mask, you're perfectly free to do that. If you want to walk around your house not wearing a mask, you're perfectly free to do that. But if you come out and interact in public, the request is, remember, this is mandated in a few places, but not, you can't get a fine for this, at least in this part of California that we live in. The request is that you wear a mask to protect not only others, but to protect yourself. And the protecting others is really important because remember, 60% of transmission occurs from people who have no symptoms at all.
Right. Yeah. Well, this has been extraordinarily helpful. Really appreciate it. And just wondering, because of course we're trying to, get a sense of science, but through this lens of creativity, do you have any particular arts that you like to observe, watch, or that you actually have as your own practice?
Well, actually, the funny thing is that another guy and I, who's from the occupational medicine group at UCSF, have been advising the San Francisco Opera about how to get back up on its feet. And if you can imagine an art form where people stand up on the edge of a stage and sing without masks on and spew respiratory particles all over an audience with a median age of 75, in a building built in the 1930s, this is tough, so it's a good challenge for us. And I've grown to appreciate opera even more than I did before.
Awesome. Well, hopefully we will all be able to appreciate opera very soon again as it comes back to our halls and our theaters and opera houses. George Rutherford, thank you for helping us gain knowledge through the lens of creativity here on Artful Science.
Thank you. It's terrific.